Okay, we're going to get started. Again, my name is Al Romain, and I'll be doing a little bit of facilitating as Rick Notman goes through this Moving Beyond Business Vision webinar. I see that by our sign-up list and kind of looking it over, we do have many of you that have not, or most of you on here have not switched to Spire. We have many of our partners connected. I see there are some that are on Spire already, but this is geared towards those that are not, but you certainly will learn from this webinar as well. A couple things to note that there is a questions panel on the GoToWebinar section. As Rick goes through his presentation, go ahead and key questions in there. We will take the questions at the end. It's a very full 90-minute presentation, so we're going to get, should leave some time at the end for questions, but there may not be a time to get them all, but we will continue with them at the end, even after the end of the 90 minutes, if you want to stay on and get those, hear the answers for those. But we are also recording this, so if for some reason you cannot listen to all the questions, you'll be able to catch those afterwards. Another thing too is for those of you that have joined us today to look at purchasing Spire for your business, we are going to be offering a bit of a incentive for you at the end of the presentation to make that switch between now and the end of July as well. So I don't think I've missed anything in the startup. So Rick, why don't you go ahead and start with your presentation?
Okay, great. Thanks, Al. Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. I'm become a bit notorious for having 2-hour presentations that take 6 hours. So I don't want to do that today. So I want to try and get through as much material as I possibly can. I think it's important when I sat down to plan this to try and think about what an existing BusinessVision customer would want to see in terms of Spire. And I think a lot of that comes down to just really wanting to see the application and how it functions. So a good 2/3 of the presentation and perhaps longer is going to be showing you right from the start how you convert BusinessVision information over to Spire, and then some decision making we made about things that we've enhanced on the Spire side that I think you'll be impressed by. I want to do a quick presentation though at the beginning, just to kind of go through a little bit of the background behind this presentation in terms of what we're talking about, who I am, some technology things, just a couple of things that we want to kind of go through before we get started. Who am I? I don't generally like presentations that spend an inordinate amount of time talking about the presenter, but I think it bears on this conversation. I spent about 15 years working with BusinessVision and started in the DOS product and kind of worked all of my way through, right through to more or less the product that you work with today in BusinessVision. So a lot of experience with BusinessVision. I've been very involved in the development group from the creation of the first Windows product through to the introduction of multi-currency. So I know quite a bit about the business requirements. And that's kind of why I was excited about joining Spire, was that they're really trying to kind of take that ball and run with it. What are the things that BusinessVision does really well? What are the things that we can add to BusinessVision in terms of functionality? And that's really where Spire ends up. And hopefully I'll get a chance to demonstrate that as we go along. I've had experience in pretty much every aspect. So I've been a user. I've actually done payroll for customers and worked with customers. I've been a partner and I've been a customer as well. So both of BusinessVision and ultimately Spire as well. So I've got a pretty good angle on the various different aspects of Spire and how it works, and I think still a very good understanding of the BusinessVision idea as well. I've also got a development experience. I spent a number of years developing add-ons myself, both for BusinessVision and then subsequently for Spire as well. And if anything kind of excites me, it's some of the options that are open to you with Spire that were never really open to you with BusinessVision, and I think I can be safe to say never will be. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that, and not just about development in particular, but how that applies to you as a customer. What is the advantage that that confers to you? So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. And then of course, Spire experience. I've been with the company for just about 2 years now, but was quite familiar with Spire before that as well. So that's my background, and kind of what I'm going to take you through is based a lot on my experience. A bit of history of Spire. So we sort of understand where things fit. The people who started Spire as a software company originally were quite familiar with BusinessVision as well. They'd resold the package. They had created a package called BV Essentials, which is essentially an add-on for BusinessVision that really enhanced a lot of functionality. So it increased the functionality of sales orders, introduced lot numbering, introduced production orders, which is something we'll talk briefly about. So it was really what can't BusinessVision do as well as some customers need? Great, that's a idea that will move into BV Essentials. Then BV Essentials, of course, got to the point where it was getting closer and closer to an accounting system, and the decision was made, well, we already have all this. We can do this a lot better if we have control over everything, the database and the server and so on. So that made sense actually to move on to an accounting system. And that's ultimately what the beginning of Spire was, what is the functionality or the functional requirements of a business that BusinessVision serves? How can we do that better? And then, of course, how can we do that as a full-blown accounting system? And what you'll see, and hopefully I get this across well in the demo, is that the whole goals and priority idea of Spire is to provide the best possible accounting solution, but not only now, also in the future. So how can we keep adding functionality that better and better suits the kinds of needs that people have? And those might be evolving needs in a business, or they might be static needs. I just need to be able to operate more quickly, be able to more quickly fix mistakes, or specific kinds of functionality, like, for example, production orders. So the goal really is, how do we create a better system for customers in this market? And that's really what excites me is I think that accounting systems can utilize technology to provide better solutions. Even in today's day and age, I don't think we do as good a job at that as we could, and Spire is really kind of geared towards how can we keep getting that better and better and better. Who's the presentation for? I think Al kind of talked to this a little bit, but it's for BusinessVision customers who are going to run into the problem with the 2020 logon. If you're not on plan with Sage and you're not up to date with software, there's kind of an embedded problem in BusinessVision where you may not be able to log on past a certain date. To be fair, that problem is resolved in current versions of BusinessVision, but existing customers who may not be necessarily happy with the kind of functionality they have may not want to go back on plan. They might want to consider Spire instead. I'm going to make the argument that that's a very good idea regardless. Even if you think BusinessVision might be a product we're staying on, have a look at Spire. It really is relatively easy to look at, but provides the kinds of facilities that will really kind of change how you work with accounting software. And then, of course, there's the BusinessVision user who's on plan, who's working with the product, but wants more, is what it really boils down to. Wants better access to information, wants to be able to, as I said, correct mistakes more quickly, and wants additional functionality. I've worked with BusinessVision, as I said, for a long time, and I certainly think it's a great product, but I think it's a fair statement to say that not a lot of new functionality has come BusinessVision's way or is likely to in the long term. Lots of reasons for that, which I won't get into, but suffice it to say that with BusinessVision, what you've got is what you've got for the most part. With Spire, we have great plans going forward, and we already exceed the functionality that BusinessVision has by, I think, a substantial margin. And then, of course, there's the BusinessVision BV Essential user. So someone who's running BusinessVision is also running BV Essentials and potentially has been for some time, and really wants a better experience. So they want a tighter integration. They don't want to have to worry about moving between two distinct applications. And they want all the enhancements that come from having everything in a single system. So those are kind of the primary people I'm trying to address. And the way I put this presentation together was, if I was one of those people, what would I want to know in terms of functionality, in terms of the story, in terms of what the future plans are, and so on. The big question is it time to move? Well, it depends on where you are on that list. If you are one of those customers who has to make a decision before 2020, now's a really good time to be thinking about doing something. That, I think, is the wise move there, is to move to Spire, but in any event, you're going to have to make a decision at some point soon. As a BusinessVision user, are you ready to look at the kinds of things that Spire can enhance in terms of the process? And then, of course, if you're a BusinessVision BV Essentials user, are you ready for tighter integration? You know, a better experience when you're dealing with things like bills of materials versus production orders, or the sales process and facilitating suggestive selling through sales orders. And again, I'll try and take you through some examples here where I show these things. So is it time to move? I think it is. You know, Spire's been around for a number of years now. Like all accounting systems, the start was rocky. I was around at the beginning when BusinessVision first started, and the rocky start that I'm referring to in Spire doesn't hold a candle to what the rocky start was when I first started at BusinessVision. So, but I think we're well past that. Large number of users on Spire at this point, and support is certainly not as busy as would be suggested if we were running into a lot of problems. So. Options, I won't spend a lot of time here, but I think if I'm going to try and convince you that Spire is something worth considering, I should tell you what some of the obvious options are. You know, one of them is Sage 300. You know, Sage has put a big push on to look at Sage 300, or what used to be referred to as ACPAC, as an upgrade path for you. There are problems with that one. There's a limited conversion, meaning that you're primarily going to get your flat files, customer, inventory, vendor, and so on. And not a whole lot more. So you're going to end up having to kind of transition over and lose some history information. The bigger problem is really in the different procedure idea. And I don't know how to exactly explain it, except to say that it is so completely different from what you're used to that it's essentially a complete ground up retraining of how you work with that package. I would not expect even a person with a lot of experience who's highly intelligent to quickly be able to transition between BusinessVision and Sage 300, even with the conversion. And that has its costs. Longer term, there are other costs. It's a more difficult to work with package in terms of procedures. It suits certain environments very well, but I don't think that those environments be appropriate for the kinds of solutions that BusinessVision and Spire have provided. Things like month-end closes and heavy-duty GL consolidations and things like that, Sage does very well, but aren't necessarily key points for a lot of customers who use Spire and BusinessVision. I will say that the only successful ones that I've seen, that's probably unfair, the most successful Sage 300 installations I've seen have been when some third-party integration mandates Sage 300 as the package you use. So that would be, you know, some kind of heavy warehouse management system or a corporate consolidation requirement or something like that, where you have to go. You don't really have a whole lot of choice. Another option is stay with BusinessVision. That's an option that obviously people need to consider. You know, if you're satisfied with BusinessVision, you're comfortable with the idea that what you've got right now is what you're going to have beyond legislative changes in perpetuity, then maybe that is a good decision for you. I'd suggest it isn't. I think most businesses want to see the system evolve with them, or certainly have some growth room for their business. But that is an option. And I know that if you had to come back on plan, that there are options for you there as well. And then, of course, there's the Spire example, which we're going to spend most of this presentation talking about. That has a comprehensive conversion. Comprehensive conversion probably short sells that a lot. I've said in other presentations that some of the best sort of software engineering I've seen, because when it goes through the way that it's supposed to, it's essentially seamless. Everything comes over, and there's really complete fidelity between what you had and what you get. That is an incredibly difficult feat to achieve from a development standpoint, and that's why it impressed me right from the beginning. The notion that you can end up with a different system on the other end that still covers all the functionality of the original system is an impressive thing. And again, I don't want to oversell that. I mean, there are differences in functionality, and it is possible you can run into problems in the file conversion, although I've seen some incredibly old sets of data come through that conversion that are quite large successfully. So again, we've put a lot of work into making sure that that's as clear and as clean and as comprehensive as it possibly can be. The biggest issue is kind of the opposite of the Sage 300 example, which is that the procedures are very similar. You should be able to convert from BusinessVision to Spire, and with relatively little additional training or setup, be able to function in the ways you expect. So the way you go about processing a sales order, the way you go about issuing and receiving a purchase order, these are all things that kind of cover the same sort of process. The neat thing about Spire is that in addition to all that, there are new options. And I'm going to take you through some of those new options. Things like requisitions, things like list use and facilitating quick orders, ease of reversals is something that's a big focus in Spire. So we'll take you through some of those things as well. So is it really that easy? The salesy answer is, yep, it's really that easy. The technical answer is, it depends on the situation. I would say that conversion rates are probably somewhere in the 95% range in terms of success rates with just point this at a BusinessVision set of data and convert it. But there are sometimes issues you can run into, and that should be really no surprise since a lot of that data has been sitting around for 20 years, or potentially could have been there since the early days of BusinessVision 2, where the product was first started. So, the technical answer is probably most appropriately maybe, likely, but maybe. And then the reality is that there is some work here involved. Forms out of the box with Spire work perfectly, they're exactly the way you would expect, but most companies do require a little bit of form customization. That can be as simple as you want to do a bit of branding on your form, and that can be as complex as I want my form to look quite different than the defaults, and I want to have additional messaging and so on. Even out of the box, forms are pretty powerful in Spire though, and I'll show you a neat example in the presentation that shows you that beyond the logo, you may not actually even need to do much with forms. Third parties is a big part of this. Third-party integration in today's day and age, I think are really ultimately as important as almost any kind of functionality within the application. What does that mean? That means that almost all mid-range accounting systems now rely on third parties for all kinds of different things. Maybe that's some kind of time card software for integrating to payroll, or it's a business intelligence tool, or it's a stock counting application, or it's a EFT payments application. So you need to double check to make sure those third parties are available, and we can help you with that. Most third parties who were on board with BusinessVision are also on board with Spire. So, but please don't make that assumption. Go ahead and do your homework and make sure that those things are covered. And when I say do your homework, we generally talk about people being involved with a partner who either already knows the answer to that question or who knows how to quickly get the answer to that question. So the homework really is ask your partner, and if they're not sure, then they can contact us and we can give them some more information. Training. I've seen people go from BusinessVision to Spire with zero training. So it can be done, and I've seen it done. I'm not sure that I would consider that ideal, because you're missing opportunities when you do that. If you have absolutely no training and you just jump right into Spire and you start processing, the concern is not so much that you do things wrong, but that you won't be taking full advantages of some opportunities that are available to you that you may not be aware of. The best example off the top of my head I could think of that is Spire has some nice optional facilities for handling things like backorder processing. If you're unaware of those things, then you're kind of left with some limitations that BusinessVision had that have since been resolved by Spire, but you haven't known to turn that feature on. So that's the kind of thing where training is helpful, and even demos like this are helpful. Just the ability to see, oh, okay, I see he's able to do that. I don't know how, but at least I know that option is available. Or I do know how because he took me through that example. So training, I think, is an important thing, but not so much so that you have to use the software package, but that you can take full advantage of it. And then lastly, the most important thing I would suggest is probably provisioning. What do I mean by provisioning? I mean knowing that you're running with hardware that supports Spire in an optimal way. It's been BusinessVision's been around for quite some time and will run on some pretty obscure old sort of hardware, software, OS operating system kind of combinations. So you want to make sure that supports the kinds of things that Spire needs to do. Partners, again, are critical in this environment because they already have experience with, I have a client who's running in this environment and it works great, or I have a client who's running in that environment and they're running into problems. So it's not to say that it's a terribly difficult hill to negotiate. It's more that you need to be aware that that's something to consider before you kind of start down the Spire road. I'll also say that when it comes to provisioning, you want to look at that because Spire supports a lot of things that BusinessVision doesn't. So, high resolution monitors, which are now pretty much standard, they aren't really supported particularly well by BusinessVision, but they are supported better by Spire. Whether that's detachable lists you can put on multiple screens, or support for much clearer, crisper displays, or the ability to show a whole lot more configurable rows and columns and grids. These are all things that can take advantage of a modern monitor and a modern operating system. So, if you have the opportunity to consider upgrading at that point, it's worth doing that for that reason alone. Why should you try and how? I kind of alluded to it, but the best way to go about doing this is to, if you don't have a partner, contact us. If you do have a partner, talk to them, and they can actually get you a demo and install it. I highly recommend, and I'm a big advocate of the idea of working with your own data, meaning elect a workstation, have your partner get you a download link and install the product with you, convert your data, and then work with your data. I think you're far better off to do that because process and data kind of mingle. So how you go about doing things with your own data is important, and you need to know that Spire facilitates that and supports that at least as well, if not better, than BusinessVision does. So I'm a big fan of that idea, and that also addresses a lot of other questions. Can you get through the file conversion without any trouble? If you run into any problems, can those be quickly resolved? And they always can. So, but you want to know that in advance of committing to a conversion of your live data and switching over. How technical do I need to be? Well, if you're working with a partner, you don't have to be technical at all. I'm always leery on this one because I've learned a long time ago that underestimating customers is a bad idea. There's almost always someone on staff who's got some technical experience or wants to know. Or, one of the last customers I dealt with before I joined Spire was an electrical engineer with a PhD. So he had no problem not only did he have no problem with the technicalities, he wanted to know what they were. So you don't have to be terribly technical, but if you want that information is available as well. And on that point, just a couple quick things about differences in technology. I promised that I wouldn't get too technical in this presentation, but there's some key things here I think that are important to know. I wish that I had known some of these things when I first got involved with Spire, because it would have helped my understanding develop a bit quicker. Spire, unlike BusinessVision, really truly does have two components, a desktop component and a server component. The server component, not surprisingly, runs on your server, and the desktop component runs on one or more workstations. That's important because part of Spire, and a big component of Spire, is this notion of what's called an API, or an application programming interface. That's built right into the application. It's not a bolt-on. In fact, it can't even really be separated from the application because the API is really our business logic window as well. The database is Postgres, although you don't communicate directly with Postgres. Mostly you communicate via the Spire API. When I say you, I mean the Spire desktop application. You could work within Spire and be completely unaware of this. The key point I want to get across here is that there's some great functionality benefits that you get out of this, and quite frankly, some really important practical benefits you get out of this. If you'll notice on the slide, this UI layer versus business layer versus data layer idea, for technical people, that has always been kind of the way that you would want to develop a system. You'll keep your user interface separate from your business logic, which is separate from your data, and have those interactions limited specifically to the layers that they apply to. So you might ask, okay, I'm a business person and I do bank recs and payroll. Why does that matter to me? Here's why it matters. When you successfully separate out those layers, things like drop transactions or this file got updated, but that file didn't, can't happen. And that's really the main reason why so much work goes into that kind of separation, is that the mediation of things like database updates happens at the business layer, and the communication between the UI layer, the user interface layer, and the business layer can't create those problems. Basically, what happens is the business layer will reject the ability for you to do that because it's what talks to the database. So again, you don't have to understand any of these things. What I think is important is that you understand some of the benefits that are conferred to you as a result of those things. And I'll get into, hopefully, if I don't run out of time, a brief example of the API at the end and tell you the other part of the story about what the advantage of an API is. So things to watch out for. Forms, I mentioned, processing differences. The bigger problem here, if you're working towards moving from Spire to moving from BusinessVision to Spire, is not that the processing differences are big, it's that the processing differences are small, meaning that there are some processing differences and they may not necessarily be obvious until you work through examples. So that's good news on one hand. It means the training issue is not as big a concern, but it's another problem on the other hand, in that I highly suggest that once you've converted your data, you do a little parallel processing. What's it like when I do a payroll here? What's it like when I do a payroll there? What's it like when I process a payment here? What's it like when I process a payment there? So basically, the notion of those processing differences is something that I highly suggest you work through. Third parties we talked a fair bit about, just make sure they're available. And then hardware support and requirements, or what I referred to as provisioning at the beginning of the presentation, is an important part of things as well. So last slide, and then we'll get into the demo proper, because I want to spend as much time in front of Spire as we can. So what's the important questions that you might be asking? If it were me, the important questions I want to know are, is Spire a stable application that I can run without trouble? And I mentioned that already, that Spire has actually been around for quite some time and is working quite well for a large number of customers. We've invested pretty heavily in automated testing and processes to kind of help facilitate that, maintaining that stability in the long term. And that's oftentimes a pivot point. I know it certainly was with BusinessVision, where you kind of hit that point where you can say, okay, I know that we can provide a stable expectation out of the application. And I think Spire's gotten there. Longevity, there's certainly enough Spire customers out there that at this point we'd love to bring on more, and that's what this presentation is all about. But there's certainly enough here to support Spire as a company. So longevity-wise, big plans, and we're kind of covered on that side. And then I think the biggest question: what is the priority? What is Spire attempting to achieve here? And really, that's what are we doing on your behalf? In terms of trying to provide good functionality. And I've kind of hit on some of those things. We're trying to provide better functionality. We're trying to make onerous tasks less onerous, and we're trying to make fixing things easier and provide better functionality going forward. There's some really cool long-term plans, and those are things more that are in recognition of the fact that we live in a world that's connected to the internet, and that mobile devices are a commonplace thing. A lot of that development design schema I showed you there is to facilitate that as well. If you're connecting via a mobile device, the notion of drop transactions and things like that has to be handled. And that kind of technology sort of approach is really what that's all about. So we won't get into the finer details of that, but suffice it to say that's kind of what's on our mind in terms of the directions we want to go. At the end of the day, it's all about business functionality, though. Is this providing a better experience for a customer who's trying to run their business? Does it make it easier for them to run their business, or does it make it harder? And obviously, we want the former and not the latter. Okay, so this is a good place for me to drop out of here, and we'll go right into the presentation. I think Al mentioned, if you have notes or if you have questions, you want to make notes along the way, please do. I'm not going anywhere at the end, and I'll answer any questions that anybody has to have. And if there's some overlap on questions, we can maybe group them together at the end as well. So where I wanted to start with this is, in keeping with the notion, I wanted to start from scratch. So I'm not quite from scratch. I've already installed Spire and I've already licensed it. But what I want to show you here is how you convert a BusinessVision company. So I'm going to add an existing company, browse to the directory it exists in, which in this case is BusinessVision. And I'm going to use the demonstration data. If you've been using BusinessVision for any length of time, you should recognize that file name. That's the control file that controls next transaction numbers and users who can log in and so on. So by picking that, what you're essentially telling Spire is that's the company that I want to convert. I kind of alluded to this already, but I'm currently on what's referred to as the server. It's a little confusing, but my workstation is both the server and the client. Under normal circumstances, you'd be in a door or in a locked room behind a door at the server when you're doing this, restoring data or backing up data, or you'd automate this process. So when I click on authorize, what happens is it goes through a process where it first reads the BusinessVision information, kind of moves it into Postgres tables, which is basically the database tables that Spire uses. And then after this process, it goes through and converts that information. So creates new tables, expands new fields, introduces new functionality, all as part of that process. So that's the second part, the database upgrade part. This process is surprisingly fast. I've found that even with customers with what are essentially ginormous sets of data, this process can be done sometimes even in as little as a couple of hours, sometimes less. So again, the process is quite quick. Everything is covered here. So I don't really think there's any considerations I have to give you at this point about what you might lose or what isn't converted. Everything essentially is converted now. That's workbook fields on kind of the far end of things are converted over to the same kind of concept in Spire. That's payroll information. That's all your historical information. That's all your open sales orders and purchase orders. There are a couple of small things that might come into play, but they're more to do with open reconciliations and production orders. Actually, production orders is not a good example, but the couple small things. But essentially, that is a conversion that aims for complete fidelity. I'm going to start up Spire from here. I usually use the start here because my desktop changes regularly, and it's usually a lot busier than this. And I'll log on. When you log on, the first time you log on, you pick a server. That server could be a server name in your environment. In this case, it happens to be my machine. I already added a user ID because I want full access to everything. I'm using what's referred to as an admin user. And I'll log on. This is super duper old data, so I'm going to change my date so I can log on. And that will basically take me in. So at this point, I said that, you know, fidelity is here for everything. That includes things like recurring journal entries that you might have had set to pop up within BusinessVision. So here I can view or post them from here, but now I'm in. So let's go to inventory first. So there's my inventory list. And if we're working through what you would be doing, you would see your inventory list, your sales order list, and so on. So from here, I kind of want to talk about equivalent functionality and some neat things that are different in Spire that I think you might find useful. As you can probably tell already, Spire takes this list view notion or list notion as your starting point for maintenance. So you want to maintain an inventory item, you do it from the inventory list. You want to add an employee, you probably start from the employee list. You don't have to, and you'll see examples of this as I go along, but this is sort of the starting point. The key thing about this is that these lists are a whole lot more facilitating than they are in BusinessVision. Everything's sortable, so I can sort by any of these columns. I can filter, which is a big thing. So here I might say, well, let's do a filter. Let's do it for on-hand quantity. So I just pressed O, and is greater than, and let's do 100, for example. And I'll add a little bit more to the filter. Let's say that I also want to see where the current cost is greater than 100 as well. So these are all entirely decided on based on what your requirements are. In this case, I might say, well, this is a list I want to look at for items that I know are embedding a lot of value in my inventory, meaning I'd much rather have this cash in my bank account than in my stockroom in the back. So I want to try and work through these items. That wouldn't be a lot of good if you couldn't save it. So one of the things you can do here is reorganize how you want that list to look. So in this case, if I'm worried about costs and on-hand quantities, I probably want to see those first. I can turn things on or off in this list. All these columns are all values I can turn on or off. I won't bother turning all of them off, but at this point, just to show you, you can turn them on or off. And then when you're ready, you can say, okay, I want to save this as a preset. So what does that do? That basically says, I want this list to persist for future use for whatever purpose I'm going to use it for. So I might call this invested inventory. I can have that for everyone or just myself. And I can show it in the module list, and I can also have it remember the state of what columns are displayed and what size they are. So when I do that, what happens is the default inventory list I can use, it's not lost. I can modify that as well. But just by clicking on one of those filters, I can quickly see a subset of the items that I'm looking at. So hugely powerful, because that lets you, if you're the product manager, say for the speaker department, have just a list of speakers and search within that list and work within that list. It lets you have just a list of customers for the territory you're working on or that you happen to be responsible for. So everything I'm showing here is all generically applicable to all the modules where it would make sense. Your customer, vendor, employees, inventory, sales processing, production processing, and so on. While you're in any of these lists, it's easy to edit. So whether I happen to be here and I want to edit this item, or I happen to be in the main list, just double click on it. And that brings up the edit screen where you can see the attributes of that item. And as I mentioned earlier on, complete fidelity here. So whatever was in BusinessVision, you're going to see coming across into Spire. Lots of additional functionality throughout here. You know, things like being able to allow or disallow back orders at the item level, or whether or not you want to allow returns of a particular item. Those are all kind of new functional things that affect sales processing. And they're all answers to business questions. Lots of businesses don't allow back orders on certain items because they know they've got limited stock, and there's really no point having a back order you have to cope with because you're not going to be able to get that item again. One thing I'll note is that a lot of these settings that are at the item level are also at the company level. So I can actually turn off back order processing company-wide if I want to, so that back orders are not an issue. I remember back in the days of doing product knowledge seminars with BusinessVision, I would run into customers like that on occasion who didn't really understand what a back order was for. You know, their business just didn't require them, and it was onerous to even think about them as a notion in the context of their business. So again, you can do that on a company or on an individual basis. But back on the lists, a couple quick things to show you about the lists. Let's just close this. So while you're working in the lists, you can filter them. You can also do other things from them. So even within a list, you can select things. A good example of this might be, okay, well, let's show you two versions of this. Printing, for example. Here I'm in the entire inventory list. If I choose print all, and I run a stock report, inventory status report, what I get is basically everything in the list. So when I preview that, there is a complete stock list, including serial numbers of everything that's in that list. So that's one way to print. Another way to print is say, okay, I'm interested in my invested inventory list. I want to know what items I need to work on. So let's just print all from that list. And what you get is essentially an ad hoc query, because when you preview that, you're now just getting those items that are presented in that list. So much shorter stock list. But what often gets missed, and I find really powerful, is that you can also print selection. So you could say, for example, from this list, you know, I want you to go out into the warehouse and pick up these 3 items. I don't want to write it down. I would much rather just print a report out and hand it to you. So if I go print selected, it says, okay, you've selected 3 items within the grid and whatever filtered grid you happen to be in. So those are the 3 items that you get. Super powerful. That means that I can quickly filter for items and create a quick list to produce as a printed output to hand to somebody to do whatever it is. And maybe that's a production treatment. Maybe that's go put these in a box because I'm going to a show. You know, there's lots of different ways that you can use that. Lots of functionality around these lists that's quite useful for other reasons. Let's sort based on current cost. And let's say you decide that you want to push those items in sales, meaning that you want people who are selling to focus on these particular items because you know you've got a lot of stock on them and you're particularly concerned that your bank account balance is getting low. And one way to do that is to go into the price matrix and set up, you know, preferred pricing. But another way is just to say, okay, let's just change the color of those items and then let my sales department know. So here I'm doing something called a group edit, that those items that you see in red are items that you can sell at a higher discount. Normally our margin requirement is 50%, but these are items where, they must go because I need the cash, so sell those items. And what happens, I'll jump around a little bit here, but what happens is in sales, when I go into sales, you'll see when I start to type those items, that anything that's on the list that meets those categories or is set up to be in red will show up in those lists as red as well. So in the inventory lists and sales orders and purchase order processing. And the color notion, the group edit and the color notion applies in both the example I'm showing here, but also in customer and also in vendor. So you can use that color notion for other things. And I've seen all kinds of uses where people have said, okay, I'm going to change colors of customers. Blue means this, green means that, red means that. And again, you can use that for whatever purpose that you see fit. So very, very handy way of working with things. One of the most useful things, and if you're a version 2 user of Spire, you probably haven't seen this, is that within these lists, so let's say I go into invested inventory and I talk to a customer and they say, you know what, that's perfect, I want to buy these items. If you click create sales order, that directly goes to a sales order with the items you selected on it. So a lot of the focus on what Spire tries to do is, having to go into sales orders and type part numbers over and over again is time consuming, fraught with problems, and easy to make a mistake. If you've already selected those items in a grid, why should you have to type them again? So a lot of the things that we've done, especially in recent versions, are around that idea of how can we better facilitate these things? How can we make this process go faster? And that's really what that's all about. I'll come back into sales orders. I'm certainly not done talking about sales orders, but while we're in inventory, let's show you something else. So one way is to filter with these filter lists, but a quick filter is another way to just look something up. So if I just type in CD204, then I'm going to find anything that has CD204 in it. But that works anywhere. So I can say, let's type in auto skip, for example. That happens to be the end of the description, but it finds that anyway. If I had to kind of name the single most important thing that people have asked for in BusinessVision, it's that. It's the ability to quickly look something up without necessarily knowing what its part number is or the beginning of its description is. And there's some neat technology that supports that, but it works really well even on large databases with many users. It's something called a full text index that supports that kind of use. So super, super useful. Once you've look that up, just double clicking on it will get you into that part number. And then you can, again, work with the different functionality that's in part numbers or customers or load a purchase order or whatever it is you're trying to do. I'll go into some examples, but suffice it to say that there's some nice enhancements even in inventory type. Non-physical, I found a couple of customers who really loved. And that essentially says, I can have this in stock, it can have a selling price, but I'm not concerned about its quantities and I'm not concerned about its cost prices. So that would be the kind of ideal thing you'd use for a service item. We'll talk briefly about manufactured items, kitted items, and macros. They all kind of have specific use cases that we'll go into as well. And then, of course, in serialization, Spire also out of the box supports lot numbering in addition to serialization. So lot numbering essentially is kind of like serialized inventory, except that you can have more than one item within a lot. So it's not one hard drive with one serial number. It's this this pail of chemicals, and all the chemical within that pail falls into this lot. Or all the pucks within this fall into this lot. So won't go into a lot about lot numbering, but it's, again, very similar to serialization. Let's talk about requisitions, because I mentioned that. So on the topic of the notion that that you want to be able to do things quickly, one of the kind of most important things I think that Spire introduced is the ability to tie together modules. So inventory to purchasing, inventory to production orders, sales orders to production orders. These are all relationships that are automatically there if you want to work through them. So to give you a quick example, let's do a quick filter. Let's say I'm interested where the reorder point is greater than something. we'll pick a number that'll give us a short list. Let's say it's greater than 10. I could also do available quantity is less than a number or whatever, but for the purposes of this example, I want to do that. But what I can do from here is I can say, okay, I want to requisition the entire list. So what happens if I go into requisition is, oh, actually I have to select first, sorry. Select list and go requisition. It warns me that there's an item in there that's already manufactured, so I can't requisition that, but it creates a list of all the other items I might requisition. So what's a requisition? Think about it as a list you can work from that kind of tells you out of the box what you might want to order, and also creates the order for you if you've got things set up correctly. For inventory to create a purchase order, minimally you need a vendor number, so a preferred vendor, and you can edit that right from here. So I can say, you know what, I think I'm going to order this one from AM Comp because I haven't set up my preferred vendor yet. What happens is you can also even change required quantities here as well. So what happens is when you're ready to do it, you just go ahead and click on save, because I want to come back and work on that, and then process. If you watch the order number, what happens is if there's a requisition quantity of greater than 0 and there's a vendor, that creates the purchase order for you. So without having to type anything for potentially many items, it's created a purchase order 300, 310. Just to show you that, if I go over into purchases, it's obviously right there, but I find it's often quick to just type in the number here, which is again another way to look things up. And I load it. That's created that requisition from the inventory list. I didn't use a particularly good example because that's more compelling when you're doing it for possibly a dozen items for several vendors where it might create multiple purchase orders. But the idea is this saves you time. So now it's not only suggested for you what you might be needing to get, it's let you edit that before creating the purchase orders, and then it's created one or more purchase orders for you automatically. And then from that point forward, you can go through the standard purchase order process. Standard for BusinessVision, I would say, is probably normally confirm your cost prices, issue the purchase order, produce it, bring the purchase order back up. One of the nice advancements in Spire is we try really hard not to continually close documents and have you go have to find them again and load them. So here, the purchase order stays on screen. I can receive all, or I can go through line by line. When I want to receive that purchase order, I just click on receive. And that takes me through what should be a fairly familiar process where you're asked to create a vendor invoice. You're asked to confirm those numbers. Wow, that's a big vendor invoice. You can view the transaction, which I've set as my default as a user, or you can just go directly to post. And that goes ahead and posts to accounts payable, and then asks if you want to close the purchase order. And then that you can print off a receipts list if you want, and then that finally closes the purchase order screen. So remember I said in the presentation that fidelity of the approach is the same as it is in BusinessVision. If you knew how to do that in BusinessVision, you still know how to do that in Spire. What you may not know is some shortcuts, and I'll show you some kind of neat shortcuts as we go along. Other things you might want to know. One thing I think that's kind of important is the notion of being able to quickly get things out to Excel. Let's use the filtered list. All through Spire, if you want to dump to Excel, just click on export, click on save after changing the file name or putting the location wherever you want it to go. And then you can open the file directly from here, and that's sort of dumping your list of filtered items out to an Excel spreadsheet. I would say that as much as Excel can be a problem sometimes, it can also be a lifesaver because you can hand that over to somebody or email that to somebody. They can make notes on it, confirm prices with vendors or negotiate better prices with a different vendor. There's all kinds of reasons why you sometimes need to drop information to Excel for other purposes. And I find sometimes it's better than reports. It's simpler to work with, and you can edit it in place, and you get a kind of a revision history of how that works. So I showed you an inventory. That's true basically of everywhere within Spire. Lots of generic tools. One neat one that I always forget to show, if you're in a numeric field, all of these act like calculators. So if I say, okay, well, the selling price for this item is going to be increased by 25%, if I just type that in, as soon as I leave the field, it does the math for me. And that's true in sales processing, purchase processing, payroll if you're trying to calculate it, a bonus or something like that. So all fields that are number fields act that way. So lots of neat little tools to facilitate going through this process as quickly as you possibly can. While we're talking about purchase orders, let me show you a nice enhancement in purchase orders over BusinessVision and recent versions. And to do this, I'm going to kind of group together a bunch of different features to kind of show you how they work. My case in this example is going to be, I want to create a purchase order. So I'll start in purchases. And this is the scenario where somebody has went out and already purchased something. So they're coming back with a vendor invoice in hand and 10 of an item that they're buying, for example. So in BusinessVision, this can be a somewhat onerous process because it involves opening and closing purchase orders and issuing and receiving them in multiple states. So we wanted to try and enhance this in Spire. So I'm going to take you kind of through that example. Just to make this a little bit more complex, let's assume I didn't have the part number. So I can go into any of these lists, click on new, and I can add the part number right here. So let's say this is a RV dash wire dash ROL. So I'm going to add that part number. This is wire roll of RV wire, and it sells for $100, and it costs $10, let's say. And let's save and close that. I can pick it from this list, but just note that what I said about being able to look things up from this list based on anything you type applies in the drop-down list here too. So wire is part of the part number, but not the beginning, and part of the description, well, happens to be in the beginning of that case. Let's use roll instead, and I'll get the same result. So there's roll. So that makes looking things up far easier. In this case, shouldn't be too hard to look up because I just added it. And let's order, I don't know, 3 of them. And we'll go with the cost price. So remember I said that somebody has went out, purchased this, they come back with a vendor invoice. You really want to get the purchase order in there because you want proper recognition of the inventory, but you want this to be as headache-free as you possibly can. So to make it headache-free, what we've done is, if you have the authority to do so, you can just go directly to receive. So what that does is takes you right through the end of the process and assumes the rest of the process, meaning assumes that your quantities are right and your costs are right and that you've just entered it in correctly. And I can go ahead and post, and I can close that purchase order. So no opening and closing documents, no multiple stages. The advantage to this kind of thing is that you don't get caught pushing things aside work-wise and then not getting to them, and then your stock counts are out and your costs are wrong and so on. So it just makes the whole thing a lot easier. But because we went fast, let's talk about what happens if you did that wrong. So just like everything else, you can look things up from multiple modules. So if I do my RV wire from here, just like in BusinessVision, I can go in and see that this is actually linked to a purchase order. Purchasing, go into history, and there's the original purchase order. And I can look that up and see its costs and so on. We don't want you to have to write that all down and reverse it all. So we make that process easier. But let's throw an added wrinkle in here. In addition to screwing up the purchase order, you also screwed up the part number. So you got the part number wrong as part of this process as well. So let's fix it, which is again something that's nice in Spire. And I'll explain the technicalities of this hopefully towards the end. I have access to being able to do something called a code change. So what I'm going to do here is say, and I just put it on my clipboard, I want to change that part number, and the new part number is an RV dash, I don't know, 67, let's say. I can build this list up over time, but if I'm comfortable with it, I can just go ahead and go directly to apply. And what happens is when this list refreshes, the part number changes. So again, I won't go into a lot of detail, but suffice it to say that what happens is that we don't store part numbers as unique keys. We store a pointer to the part number. And if you have the authority to change it, that just allows you to kind of fix that mistake along the way. And that, of course, changes everywhere. So if I go back in and I go to purchasing and I go to the history tab and I load up that purchase order, there's the new new part number reflected on the purchase order that was closed. So obviously you want to use that with some caution. Changing part numbers like that has a wide effect throughout the system, but there are circumstances where you need to be able to fix a mistake, and trying to straddle two part numbers over time simply because you made a mistake is not ideal. So here we've kind of went ahead and resolved that problem. So I also said we kind of screwed this up. So let's actually reverse this. So just like a sales history invoice, you just click credit. That actually brings in a reversal. I don't have to worry about the receive quantity because I know it's a negative. I go directly to receive. Yes, I want to create a vendor invoice because I want to reverse the one that's there. I want to go ahead and post that, and I want to close that purchase order. So, and it's an accounting system has rules that says you can't just remove things from the system. You have to reflect the fact that they happened, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go through all the pain involved in that process. So what I should see now is when I go into accounts payable, that I have two invoices in there for AM Comp, I think I used. And if I just move down here, there's my original invoice and there's my mistake. And I just go ahead and click on apply, and that removes it from open items in accounts payable, which is very similar to what you're used to on the BusinessVision side in terms of handling open versus closed items and history and so on. So I keep coming back to this notion that a lot of the solutions in Spire are to kind of facilitate moving more quickly. But one of the aspects of moving more quickly is being able to fix mistakes more quickly. And that in that example is fixing mistake more quickly. Other things that we've enhanced or that have been added, it's pretty easy now to bring information into Spire. To show you an example of that, let's go into import. And I have a spreadsheet where I've created a template of items I want to bring in. I want to import those into inventory. I want to use some example data called add items. And I would normally save this. So I'd set this process I'm going through up once, and then I'd save it so I didn't have to go through this mapping. But I kind of wanted to show you how this mapping works. So all I'm really doing is saying map the columns from the spreadsheet over into the columns that I want to import into. It's, in this case, spell unit of measure I want to match, and then I want to match the product code as well, which I think is towards the top. So, and this particular file has a header row, and that'll actually show me that, okay, I've mapped at least the first part number correctly, warehouse, part number, description, and so on. There's a neat thing I won't talk about much that allows you to kind of control a success or a failure in a list of items and where they go. I'm just going to go through this quickly because for this example, it doesn't matter much. If I'm ready to go, I would normally save these settings so I don't have to remember these over and over again. But if I've done this correctly, when I import, I should see that it successfully added X number of items. So lots of different import capability here: customers, vendors, sales orders, purchase orders. You can even import sales orders and invoice them as part of that process. So kind of a lot of neat facility in that import process. What I wanted to do was add parts. So if I go back into inventory, what I should see is that part number's been added, and there's the part number that was added along with it. And I added a number of items. I added the cartridge for this item, the cleaning kit for this item, the item itself, and then a manual for the item. Why did I do that? Because I wanted to show you a neat kind of facility that Spire has. And I'll do that in inventory. I'm just going to remove this filter first. And I probably shouldn't have removed that filter. I'm going to create something called an accessory list. So an accessory list is a kind of a suggestive selling idea. And what that does is it says that when I sell this item, I want to be prompted for other items that are associated with it in some way. So for that fax machine, I want to be prompted for the cleaning kit. And here I don't have to remember much. I just type FX and I get my list. And what I'll see here is, what have I added? Cleaning kit, manual, I'll add, and did I have something else? Cleaning kit, manual, and cartridge. And I can put in different quantities if I want as well. So what does this all do? When I save it, and actually, let's show the dialog as well. I'll go into sales. I'll pick a customer. I don't actually have to. And I'll type FX-27 or just law or some part of it. What I get is a pop-up now that says, okay, when you sell this, these are the items that can go with it. And it's a suggestive selling idea. When somebody calls and buys this item, you can say, okay, would you like the cleaning kit? Would you like the manual? Would you like the cartridges that go with it? And then what quantities would you like those in? So again, you can pick those things as you go and you can modify them. You know, I want those cartridges, but I don't really want to service this myself, so I'm going to say no to the manual. And what happens is that drops that down as kind of a collection onto the sales order for you to use for whatever particular purpose you wanted from this point forward. That could be going ahead and printing. That could be producing a packing slip. The idea here is that facilitates sales. Let's hold on to that thought and just talk briefly about another thing that's important to a BusinessVision customer. I'm just going to discard that. Note the selling price here I said was $500 and that was imported.
Rick, just know you got 30 minutes.
30 minutes? Okay. I only have about 2 hours more worth of material to go through,
Perfect.
so we're good. Okay, so inventory. One of the biggest changes, and I think one of the biggest enhancements in some respects, is the price matrix. So what is the price matrix? You're already familiar, if you're a BusinessVision user, with the notion of a price matrix. So that's like discounts and quantity breaks and so on. It's handled a bit differently in Spire, I think in a lot of ways a lot better, but it also adds some nice options for you. So what is the price matrix? It's kind of where all these parts come together. So here, what I've got is the price matrix where I'm going to say, here's a part number, and in this date range it gets this price, or for this customer it gets that price, or within this territory it gets this discount. The short version of this is everything that you can do in BusinessVision automatically translates into this price matrix, and you can continue to do. So that's great. But the point I really want to get across about this price matrix is it's like the pricing regime in BusinessVision with a turbocharger attached, because you can do all of that, plus you can do more. So an example, and I'm using this one in particular because I was asked a lot about this in the days where I was doing seminars for BusinessVision, is I could say, okay, for this item, my fax machine for law offices, for the customer Acme, I'm going to do a margin calculation price. And the margin calculation price I'm going to do is going to be, I want a 50% margin. So this, again, was asked for many, many times over the years. It's the idea that normally I sell this item for $500, but in this case, for this customer, maybe for this date range, if I wanted to establish it, I'm going to give this to him for whatever 50% margin is over the cost of the item. So what happens, there's a couple of things I want to show you in sales. When I sell this, obviously I have to put in the customer here, since that qualifies them for this scenario. X27. Let's take the defaults here. What I'm going to see is that the price now is a 50% margin over the cost price. So the price matrix kicks in and says there's a special scenario for this situation, this customer, this item. And in that scenario, we want a margin price calculation. I wouldn't say that as a general rule, a lot of businesses do this as their primary way of calculating prices, although I know of at least one that does. But it is a very useful thing when you've got special scenarios where you're dealing with wholesale customers who are very price sensitive. And it can even be used as a starting place. You know I want to make at least a 50% margin. I won't quote them the price until I kind of do the math in my head and figure out, what competitor prices are and so on. And then of course it's in green because that's an indicator that this price is a special price that's come through the price matrix. So short answer, everything in BusinessVision comes through the price matrix just as you would expect. Longer answer, there's even more facility in the price matrix than there was. And a partner can help you through additional opportunities that might present themselves as a result of that. Okay, let's start doing a couple of switches here. I'm going to just switch companies. This is kind of useful because I can show you a few things at the same time. So F12 actually takes me out of a company and off to the list. While I'm sitting there, I'm going to go to the server and I'm going to bring in a company, and that company is not a BusinessVision company. It's a converted set of data. Where's my example data? Called Spire Health. Restoring information or a Spire company looks similar to converting a BusinessVision company, although it's actually got less steps essentially. Instead of it actually having to go through a conversion process, it's simply bringing the tables in and setting up all the necessary links on the server end. So a little bit quicker generally than going through the BusinessVision conversion process, although the process looks very similar. I can do that while I'm in Spire. All I have to do at this point is log on. And there's my Spire Health company. This too is a bit backdated for my example. And I'll go ahead and log on. Some location functionality is turned on in this company. That's part of a GL segmentation facility that Spire has. We won't get into a lot about that, but suffice it to say that there's some neat support there for that. So what I want to show you here, payroll. Payroll, I find, is one of those things that's arguably a boring topic and an important topic, because your ability to enter information quickly in payroll, I think, is important. So I wanted to show you the big difference here in Spire, which is you maintain employees in a similar way. So they have departments and they have benefits and deductions. There's some nice enhancements that help with that. You can see lists of existing time cards. You can accumulate T4 information. We do the T4 dump. So if you have more than, I think it's 100 employees, we do that T4 dump for you, which CRA prescribes. But the big difference in processing really comes down to how you handle hourly type of scenarios. There you do it in something called a time card batch. For years in the BusinessVision parlance, batch was a bad word. It's not a bad word. It's a bad word when you're forced to do it and it doesn't confer advantages. It's a great word when it does. And here's an example where it does. So what I do is put in a date, choose whether I want to add time cards based on different departments or periods, or just add all. And what happens is that builds up a complete list for the current pay period of all the employees. And it saves all this information as I go. So from here, where this is really advantageous is if you're in an hourly scenario, you can accumulate information over time. So, here I might say, well, they also work some overtime, 12 hours at $40 an hour, for example. And for this employee, they work some premium time, $10 at 50 hours and so on. The advantage to this is I'm not required to save and load time cards, save and load time cards, save and load time card. I can work within one group of time cards all at once. And when I'm done, all I have to do is save. And I don't have to be done. That's the key thing here. That's an unposted batch, so I can come back in and reload and keep working on those employees that I've edited things for. I can tell you from years of having done hourly payroll for family scenarios, I can tell you that it's a much better way to do payroll than having to kind of remember who did I print that time card for, and did I put in all the hours, because I didn't have a way to accumulate those easily. So the batch process is much better for that. I could go into a lot of detail about payroll, but that's probably enough to kind of get across the main big difference, which is that you're working in a batch environment as opposed to an environment where you're doing it time card by time card. You can still void time cards. EFT is built right in. You can still have access to all the kinds of functionality you had in BusinessVision. In fact, the fidelity there is very, very close beyond what I just showed. I kind of mentioned at the beginning that a lot of things in Spire are answers to questions. Let me show you a quick example of two questions that I used to get a lot. So here's sales history, and I'm just loading up a copy of an invoice. So the rule in BusinessVision is you can't change history, and the rule in Spire is you can't change history. The thing is, there are times in business where you have to do things that do require that you have some control over changing history. So if I've given the user I'm logged on as authority, I can edit a sales history invoice, and I can do things like provide a purchase order number after the fact, or change out the salesperson from one salesperson to another, or specify a territory, or fix a mistake on the shipping method. And the argument here is that you're not really changing history that has any kind of financial impact. You're changing history because you made a mistake, and reversing an invoice just so you can put the shipping method in right is a pain. Creates a lot of extra overhead for no reason. So these are the kinds of things that Spire tries to focus on, are what can maintain the fidelity of a system while at the same time, allowing you to modify things. Maybe you want to fix a commission report or something like that. So again, lots of useful things like that. Email is really straightforward as well. I probably don't have time to do a great example of this, but whenever you're on any of these lists, you can go ahead and print. I don't have email, I think, set up terribly well, but if I go to email, what you see is there's an email pop up where if there are email addresses for the customer, they're available in the to list, as in that example. And we even let you set up templates. Those templates, you can have as many of them as you want, and they will automatically move in things like, let's show you a better example, things like bill contact information, company name. If you preview that, that basically constructs the whole email for you so that they not only get the attachment, they get a proper subject with the right reference information and so on. Very powerful. I won't go into a lot of detail about how you set it up, but suffice it to say you can do a lot with it. Email is really a critical part of business these days. Okay, I think I'm going to show you production because I know that there's at least a couple of people on this demo who are interested in that. So one more quick switcheroo. I'm going to bring in a company that has a kind of a simple production example. And I want to kind of briefly talk about what the big difference is between this and BusinessVision. So example data, production example. And I'll import that. And while that's importing, I'll go ahead. So while that's doing its thing, I'm going to switch companies and see if I can outraise it. Oh, I didn't make it. So there's my company, a company that basically manufactures things. So what is production? Production is essentially the idea that you have items in inventory that have a manufacturing element to them. In this case, this is my little red wagon example, and it's a manufactured item. So far, pretty much the same as BusinessVision. It has a bill of material, and that bill of material is made up of other manufactured items as well as other items. So again, similar to BusinessVision, although there's a lot of enhancement so far at this level. Where it differs from BusinessVision is that production orders, which is an add-on module with Spire, you can purchase with Spire, will allow you to create a whole separate document process, which takes into account allocation of inventory and process as part of this whole exercise. To try and show you an example of that, I'm going to pull together sales orders, requisitions, and production orders in a quick example of this. So let's show you that. I'm going to go into sales. Let's do a new order. Let's say that Rick orders that manufactured item. So my wagon manufactured item. He's going to order 3, but we have a problem because we've only got 2 manufactured at this point, and we're short by 1. So we're going to need to build some more of these. So I could go off and do a production order or a production run all on my own, but because it's faster and kind of to make this point, I'm going to save the order, but I'm also going to push a requisition. So what does pushing a requisition mean? It means that because the item that I'm requisitioning is a manufactured item, that the default is a production order, and it's going to allocate an order number. When I choose process, there's the order number that is allocated. Now that's not a sales order number, that's a production order number. So brand new thing. It's a process now that's distinct. I can go ahead and close this. Let's close this. And what I'll see is if I go over into production, I've done a few others before, but this one I've done specific to fulfill this order. It's tied to the order. So there's my sales order number and the customer it was for, but it's a production order in the sense that here are the components that are going to go into this production. Tons of things to talk about here, which I can't get into in too much detail. Suffice it to say that at this point, this build can vary. So you don't have to change the template that was off on the part number. You can change the build directly on the production order. This is a unique build to them. You can even create an overriding template that you can use for future orders as well. So a lot of neat things you can do here. But the key thing that this answers that BusinessVision didn't really have an answer for is inventory allocation. And that goes like this. If I go into inventory at this point, and I look at one of the things that goes into this, the axle, for example, my wagon has 2 axles, but at this point, there's no recognition of that fact, and someone could go about selling these items. The reason is that I pushed a production order, but I haven't started it yet. So if I close this, and I come back to production, and I say, okay, I'm ready. I want to kind of put this in progress, and I save it. What happens is when I look at the axle again, what I see is that the axle now has commitment, meaning that I can't sell any more than 6 because 2 are currently out of my inventory on a workbench and being worked on that production order. So that whole notion of having to build a bill of material to have some sense of whether or not that inventory is available is taken care of by that process. A whole lot more to it, but that's the key thing, is that inventory allocation is taken care of by that process. Okay, well, 10 minutes? Okay.
10 minutes.
Okay, what else will I go into? Let's go into one more quick thing, and then we'll end off on talking just briefly about the API. Okay, so let's go into communications. Okay, while we're in that company, actually, let's switch to a better example. Let's talk about one more, I think, neat thing, functionality-wise. Whoops. So when I was with BusinessVision, one of the things that got added along the way that was pretty hot and exciting when it was added was the notion of notes. And that kind of addresses this whole concept that notes are important because there's lots of things in a business you need to keep track of that don't necessarily fit into a field on an inventory item or customer or whatever. So a big part of what you want to do is keep track of that information in a way that integrates nicely with the system and facilitates action. So if I look at any of these inventory items, any one of them can have a note. If we call them communications on the Spire side. If they do, then that turns red. So here I might say I want a note item on sale. And what happens is that from that point forward, anytime I load that item, the communication is turned red. So minimally, you know that there's a communication there and it might be something worth reading. The problem with that, what statement I just made is minimally there might be communication worth reading isn't always enough. In fact, arguably, I'd say it's often not enough. So let me show you an example of what you can do instead. I can say, I'm actually going to show you 3 examples. I'm going to load up this item and I'm going to add a communication. And this item, the communication is going to be remind user of our AB classes. And that's remind the user that AB classes are great. I'm selling an AB roller, probably good to let them know that I also do classes on abs, but I want that to be an alert. So what happens when I try and sell that item is that I get a pop-up, and I'll just go into sales quickly and I'll sell it as PAB. And what I'll see is that as soon as I select it, I get a pop-up note. Now you don't want to overdo this, but it's quite useful. It can be used for, things that you want to let somebody know or have special circumstances. Obviously, you don't need to use that for something like accessories, but there might be additional, things you want to tell people about an item. Or this might be a credit message you want to tell a customer about, or it might be special circumstances with a vendor, the last 3 excuses you use for why you haven't paid them yet. Those kinds of things, sometimes you want to have pop up when you're in the process of doing these documents. So that's communication idea number 1. Communication idea number 2, and these all kind of work everywhere, is the idea that you can do communications that print out on documents. So if I go into the customer module Let's load up A309. So here's my business case for this example. For this customer, I'm going to do a communication, but I've had big problems with this customer. In this case, I want to let them know that there's no returns after 30 days. And save a little time, I'll just copy and paste that. But I want them to be aware of it, and I want them to be aware of it in a place where they're going to see it. So I'm going to put that on the invoice. What I'll do here is I'll go into sales, and let's do a quick invoice, as quick as I can make it. A309, and it doesn't really matter what I sell them, so let's sell them something that demonstrates that other pop-up. They're buying some ab rollers, great. But I want to invoice, and I want to go to an account, and instead of skipping the form, I'm going to go right on to previewing the invoice. So what that does now is that prints the note actually right on the document. And this isn't a modified form. This is a default out of the box form. So no return after 30 days. The cool thing about this is that, in fact, there are returns after 30 days. They're just not 30-day returns for you after 30 days, meaning that as this customer has a problem and I'm addressing that problem uniquely with that customer or that vendor or whoever it is you're communicating with on those forms. And all the forms are listed. So packing slips, purchase orders, invoices, and so on. So that's kind of example number 2. Example number 3 is a relatively new one, but kind of on the idea of Spire introducing enhancements. I'll quickly show you this one. I'm in sales orders. So let's say as a salesperson, I've been working on, let's say, this sales order. I'm particularly concerned about it because this customer is really picky about, stock being not back ordered or prices being confirmed or whatever. So what I want to do is I want to add that to a calendar. In this case, I want that to be a note for me. So I'm going to leave myself on there. And I'm going to say that I want to confirm order details. I can set a due date. In this case, the calendar is actually current to the date. So let's make it something I'm going to see. It's going to be in a couple of days from now. And I can set a time if I wanted to, but in this case, I'm just going to say that's enough. Confirm details for shipping and price. And I'll go ahead and save that. And just to get the point across, I'm going to close the sales order grid. So a couple days go by, I log back into Spire in the morning. First thing I want to do is look at my calendar, and what I'll see here is that there's an entry on my calendar for something I need to go look at. If I click on that, what I see is that pops up the note or the communication. And then from there, I can go directly to Open Related, and that takes us right into the active document where I can start working on that order, bettering the pricing, calling vendors, and so on. So this is the whole idea of sort of taking the notion of the note in BusinessVision, which is really useful, and then kind of turbocharging it by adding things like the ability to look at it in a calendar form, the ability to pop it up, the ability to print it on a document. And that's really the whole goal here with BusinessVision, the BusinessVision to Spire ideas. We want to take what you had, but make it better. Okay, I've almost worn out my welcome here, so let me do one quick thing I wanted to show you. I think this is actually super important, although it's hard to get across why. So I said in one of the slides that Spire supports this notion of an API. So what is an API and what's it for? An API is an application programming interface. It's built right into the Spire server, and it's accessible out of the box by you or a third-party developer. So how does that look? How that looks basically is if I go into a web browser and I type the name of my server and its location, and I won't go into a lot of detail here, and I proceed to log on, and here I'm using an admin user, so a user in Spire. What I'm going to see is the representation of this API in terms of how a third-party developer might see it, or arguably even how you might use it. What I'll do here is I'll look at the list of companies I have, and I have a number of them now since I've been importing them. I'll pick the one I want to work on. let's say in this case, Inspire Health Demo. I'm going to go to something called the sales collection. So technically, you don't need to know what this is. It's just a collection of sales orders. So there's the sales orders. The neat thing here is that I can create a sales order directly from here with minimal information and let Spire do all the work for me. So how do I do that? I do that by opening up, I'm on the wrong screen, I'll just show you that, by opening up the document which has information that is essentially what Spire sees as a sales order. So that might not look much like a sales order, but it's got the attributes of a sales order that Spire needs. The customer number is A309. Some reference information is optional, but I've provided it. Warehouses and part numbers I'm buying from, and I can optionally have a unit price or not have a unit price. And Spire does all that work for me. How does that work? I just take that and I come back over to the collection that I happen to be in. Let's just jump to the bottom. I pop that into that area at the bottom of the collection and I click post. So what you'll see is if it works correctly, the screen clears. And if I go back into Spire, what I should see is at the bottom of the list, when I refresh, there should be an order number there waiting for me. So let's refresh, and did I sort that correctly? Let's try it again. Oh, it's at the top of the list. So there it is. So there is 8,086 for customer A309. And if I open up that order, there's the attributes that I put in there. Created by the API, I put in there, reference information I put in there, the parts I put in and the quantities, but it went ahead and looked up things like the unit price and the cost prices and so on. Long story short, this is really there to facilitate third parties, both in terms of making the job of a third party much easier, as well as to make the process far more stable. Because you're not dealing directly with the database, you're protected from all the problems that can come as a result of version changes in Spire or problems with mistakes you might make at the database layer. I can tell you as a developer myself, that's the difference between probably a week and 3 months worth of work. And the 3 months worth of work will end up with a worse outcome than the week. So that's kind of what is an important part of facilitating third parties. But not only that, we use it ourselves. So it's not the kind of thing that goes out of scope or gets stale. We use the API ourselves for our own internal processing purposes. So didn't want to end on too technical a note, but that's kind of the purpose behind API. When you see API thrown around as a term within the Spire world, that's what it's all about, is facilitating third parties as well as ourselves and the kinds of functionality we can offer. Okay, I came in 2 minutes under. Wow, that's a miracle.
Great, thanks, Rick. So just before we get into questions, as I promised in the beginning, we're going to offer a bit of an incentive for those of you that don't yet own Spire. Now, those of you that own BV Essentials, as long as you're already as long as you're still on plan with us, this is not part of the promo, just in general, you do get Spire included in your annual fee, so you don't have to purchase it. You just have to pay for the time to get it installed and some training. But what we're offering today is for those of you that purchase, that attended this and purchase Spire before July 31st, we'll give you, that's the Spire Standard Edition. Previous to July 31st, we'll get a $500 coupon to go against the purchase. So just a bit of an offer incentive, and thank you for attending today. So let's get into some questions. There's not too many of them there, so if you want to add any more questions, go ahead and do that now. Somebody's asking or saying that basically BusinessVision previous to 2017 are the ones that have to be concerned with. So
okay.
Realistically,
Statement.
they're going to have you, if you're not up to date, you're going to have to basically repurchase to get up to date again, or get current with them. So, question is to whether that's a good investment or not. That's a decision you got to make yourself. But after seeing things today, that I know what I would decide, but I guess I'm a bit biased.
The funny thing about this conversation is that I have got 15 years in with BusinessVision, so my bias is about as honest as I could possibly be. Yeah, because it's a great product, but it's just not seeing the enhancements that frankly I would have loved to have seen it get, and Spire is. So for me, that would be a decision-making thing, but people make their own decisions. So.
Yep. Okay. Next person's saying that they've been told about this end of life of BusinessVision, but when speaking with Sage, they say no, that's not true. Well, that is correct. I mean, if you're current with your annual fees, they say they're going to keep us current, and that'll happen for as long as Pervasive and Krista reports will run on the current state of Windows. So so there's no denying that for sure.
Fear is a terrible way to make a decision, and I wouldn't want to throw that out there.
Exactly.
That's entirely up to Sage what they want to do in terms of things. So what I can say for certain is what you have is what you'll have. Outside of legislative changes, obviously payroll and tax. Beyond that, there's just not the infrastructure.
Right. Yeah.
Element, so.
Okay, somebody's got BusinessVision 2014 and wonders if that can be converted directly. I can't remember. Is 2014 go direct, Rick, or does it have to have something done to it before that?
I'm pretty sure it does, actually.
Yeah, I think
in
it does
fact,
too, yeah.
I almost don't want to tell you the oldest one that I've done, but it's I actually well before that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. Okay. Somebody asks, are the notes currently used in BusinessVision, will they convert? And yeah, those will convert into what Rick showed you as being communications, without, of course, all the extra enhancements like follow-up dates and such, which you can then in turn add and print packing slip or print invoice like Rick showed you. So
I think, just to add to that, I'm not aware of anything at this point that's not budgets and forecast. I guess it's probably the only thing where the data, in fact, is converted, but we don't offer a budget and forecast module.
Right.
But I have to really plumb the depths, and that's the only thing I can come up with. So
an in progress bank rec would have to be completed first before conversion. But
true.
Much it has to come over. So okay. Does Spire handle customer part numbers? Well, not specifically, but we have in our price matrix something called a reason field, which then can be printed on your invoices as your customer part number. So just put in your customer's price and put that code in, and under that, that will then actually print right on the invoice and packing slips or whatever you want it to print, and will actually even show up on the sales order too, so you can see them. So works very, very well for that purpose.
One thing I didn't mention is language too. I don't know why that reminded me of that, but we support French and Spanish as well. That was part of the development effort. And we actually have been talking about other options for kind of additional information like that, like language, being able to store descriptions in different languages. Currently, we don't. It's just the user interfaces in those other languages, but that's kind of on the table as well.
Yep, good. Okay, somebody's asking about the possibility of attaching a WMS, so a warehouse management system. There are some out there, so contact your partner, and they can put you in touch with those as well.
Yeah, again, I don't want to beat that API point, but we make that API available to anybody who's got access to Spire, and if there's a third party who's interested, we're actually very interested ourselves. So if they don't have an integration already, I didn't say the word, so I should say the word. It's a REST API. Anybody who's working in the web world at all, who's got development experience, will know exactly what that is. So if you're talking to them, please use that word.
Okay, good. All right, somebody wants to know where the setting for reviewing of GL and sales orders. It's under users, sales orders, and review GL. That's if you can't find specifically that you can check with your partner on that one too. Rick's showing you there.
Yeah, I didn't get a lot of chance to get into things, but there's even more user settings in here than there was in BusinessVision in terms of being able to have a lot more control over things. So, you can even do batch ordering, which is an option, not a default. It's easy to find these things. If you don't know any part of it, just type in the beginning of it, and that just limits the list down to those user settings. So lots and lots of user settings, and some very, very good ones. I don't want to start the presentation all over again, but there's things like turning off selling non-stocked items, stopping certain scenarios that you can't stop in BusinessVision. So a lot of solutions to problems in there as well.
Yeah, and then the setting for GL postings is in there as well under sales. So.
Yep. There you go.
Yeah. Modify GL transaction, that top one. there by default as well. So that's that one. So color coding of inventory, you can color code it. It's just a visual thing on screen. It doesn't serve any functionality within the program. So except the only thing it does do when you export a list, it brings the list over to Excel as well. But other than that, it does nothing in the program except for just enhance it for whatever reason you want to enhance it. So if somebody asks about whether there's sorry, I'm not quite understanding the question. Does anyone in the company know what the color-coded inventory means if an email does not accompany the color change? Sorry, I have no idea what that means. So if you want to clarify that, again, another question, I will certainly get back to it.
Yeah, maybe the best way to answer that is you elect that color to mean whatever it is that you want it to mean.
Right.
So yeah, you apply those colors or not. There's nothing that forces you to use those colors for any particular reason.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, the customer file, how many customer and emails are available? So it's a bit of a trick question because, not trick question, but there's a workaround here is that there is the main email address and a contact 1, 2, and 3 for the customer. But if on a sales order you want to be able to email somebody, you have available to you all of the customer's various ship to emails as well. So those are optionally there as well. So yeah, so easy, the 4 of them, and then other than that, the rest of the ship tos are available as well.
Just in case anybody doesn't know, we recently changed our policy on what's the equivalent of the workbook. So user-defined fields now have always been in all the modules, but now it's part and parcel of Spire. It's not an additional purchase, and you can set up as many additional fields there as you want and link them to forms and so on. So I'd say the integration is even better on the Spire side than it is on the BusinessVision side. Yeah,
but just not available to emailing of documents. That's the only thing you can't do there yet.
True.
Is it possible to have several warehouses on-hand quantities appear on the list all at once? Yeah, so if you go into the inventory list, you can turn on 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or all warehouses on your list so you see them. So you don't have to switch warehouses. You can actually show them all at once. So you can see side by side what in the warehouse, or sorry, what each item has, or what each warehouse has in stock.
Mm-hmm. I didn't talk much about this, but in these lists, actually, there's a bunch of different tools, one of which is show stock and open inventory, and they can give you a lot of information about stock right when you're in the sales order as well, or the purchase order.
Yeah, when you hit the show stock button, it's just a quick look at if you haven't got stock on it, what the rest of the warehouses actually have in stock. So.
Yep.
How well do user settings transfer from BVE to Spire? I don't know of any that don't transfer. Do you, Rick? I think they all go over.
No, the main concern people normally run into is admin user versus existing users, and right. I won't get into that whole thing, but suffice it to say that they all come over for the existing users. It's more about how do you create a template of a user for future users.
Yeah, good. Okay, can you do sales reports with various fields and sort things similar to the way you're showing an inventory? Well, sorts don't pass through to reports, but all the filters do. So if you've got a filtered list and you hit print, that'll all get passed through. But the actual sort and columns you've got laid out do work to export to Excel, but not for creation of Crystal reports.
Given our audience here, I think it's important to mention that report customization is also supported in Spire. So a partner can add custom reports and they will show up in that report list. So you can have all kinds of different variations and combinations and simplified or more complicated reports, just like you could on the BusinessVision side as well. They may need to be recreated, but all the facility you had on the other side, you have on Spire, plus the fields on which they're based. So.
Okay, next question is reports converted from BV to Spire? And the answer is no. You have to redo any custom reports you've got. Yeah. So, but we do have a supply good stock of stock reports. So.
And that gets better and better every version too.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, sales commission reports. Well, we have sales profit reports for which a commission column can be added. everybody does commission differently, so we can't, decide what commission is for any company. I know when I was in the industry doing the implementations many years ago, I don't think I ever did one commission report that matched another commission report. So they were always different, but certainly a report that does show you the profit, both and the sale prices. So depending on how you pay commission, just add another column to the report.
There's also there's some good third parties with BI tools, like business intelligence tools that handle that kind of variation too. So
yeah, exactly. That's right. Can you duplicate a previously completed PO and then edit from there? Yes, you can just go into purchase history and then just copy it.
You'll see that as a pretty standard expectation everywhere, which, believe me, is a real time saver. So when I credited that purchase order before, well, actually I'm in open purchase orders. When I credited that purchase order before, another option is copy. So credit or copy. There are special rules though, depending on how you want to do things, especially with sales history invoices. When you copy, do you want to copy with the prices? Do you want to copy and reintroduce customer prices? So some of these things have wrinkles, but they're all handled as part of that process.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Customer's hardware or Spire's hardware requirement states that SSD drives are required. If a BV customer server does not have SSD drives, it can still be installed. Well, I don't think we have it shown as required. We have it as recommended. We don't require them. But if you've got a massive database, it's money well spent if you don't have it. But the best thing to do is if you've got like Rick was talking about, older servers, if you've got a 10-year-old server, don't even bother trying Spire. Put it on one of your newer workstations to get it checked, tested, and then talk to your IT people about getting a new server. But if you've got one that's 3, 5, 6 years old and you want to try it out, by all means give it a whirl and see if you need any upgrading from there. And probably the best upgrade you can do to a server is by putting SSD drives in. And again, they've come down so much in price that it's well worth doing. So, is there different currency options available for customers? Yes, we have a multi-currency module that's built in, and you can set currency for your customer and for your vendors. We are a small company with 2 employees and 100 inventory parts. Would Spire be overkill for us? Well, 2 people and small inventory is still going to help you, because you're going to want to know what your customers are buying. You want to know, reporting wise, you want to get quick access to everything. It doesn't matter if you're small. It is definitely worthwhile still. But again, you should have a look at it. There's no harm in giving it a try. And if you think it's worthwhile for you, then have a look at it. And we do have 1, 2 users, 3. We don't make you buy 5, 10, 20 packs. We just have a Spire version. Go 1 to whatever. Our biggest number, I think, is 175 users. So you can go with whatever number you need. Okay.
Some of my best ones actually were 5-user ones, or less, believe it or not.
Exactly. Okay, is there a conversion utility for Crystal reports? Well, the best thing to do is that I've found, and I've heard other people still doing, is that open up your current BusinessVision report, because you want to get the formatting the same. Open up one of our stock reports in Spire and just start moving fields around and adding fields. And you can copy and paste headings and images and stuff off the old report, but there's not a routine that you're going to say, open this BusinessVision report and convert it to a Spire report. You are going to require some knowledge of Crystal reports to do that. If it's like Rick said, if it's as simple as moving around some fields, then you don't need to worry about it. But it's not that hard to do. But if you want to put some complicated formulas in, then you're going to need some knowledge.
Yeah, just if people are still looking at the screen, just so it's clear, while there's fidelity and functionality, and that's our goal, the fidelity at the database level is things are changing quite significantly. To the extent that any kind of conversion of a form would be nightmarish at best, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
A good example of this is you saw me go in and change the part number. Well, the reason I was allowed to do that is the part number is not a unique key. We now store IDs against part numbers. And that confers huge advantage for all kinds of reasons, but it makes that kind of fidelity between reports very, very difficult to achieve. So
Yeah,
you'd be better off to kind of start with a stock one from Spire and introduce the same logic.
exactly. Okay, is there a point where a dedicated server is recommended, greater than number of X users? Well, really the answer to that is, can you afford, if that person who's using that workstation and you're also the server, they do something to hang up the computer or shut it down or decide they want to do a reboot, is it worth your time to do that? So realistically, I mean, you don't have to run a Windows server for a small group of people. It will run off of workstation software, Windows Pro, but you're better off to have a server. I mean, again, it's all about trying it, see if you're happy with the performance, and if that workstation's got good performance, it should work.
The good news here is that I would, in the BusinessVision context, if you were doing that, you're leaving yourself open for some fairly nasty problems. You're a lot less open doing that with Spire, but I don't know that you're going to get the best experience either. So, try it and see, I guess, is the best way to put that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, that's the last question. I scrolled through the questions and I skipped a couple that looked like duplicates. But if you didn't get your question properly answered, then get it through to your Spire partner and they can either answer it for you or they can get the question to us. But that's it for today. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And again, don't forget about the fact that between now and July 31, you'll get this coupon. Stephen's going to email out the coupons to everybody that will give you that $500 off price on the Spire Standard Edition. So make sure you utilize that. So again, thanks, Rick, for doing this for us. It was a great presentation. And
thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us.